Hey there, I'm Alex Kidman, and this is the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro, and it sure does remind me of something. Okay, let's not beat around the bush here. The Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro looks like the Apple Watch Ultra a lot, and there's really no doubt that this is quite a deliberate thing. It's meant to be evocative of Apple's considerably more expensive smartwatch, because here in Australia, the Huawei Watch Fit Pro will only run you $469, and whilst some people might say, well, that's a lot to spend on a smartwatch, and to a certain extent they might be right, it's certainly a heck of a lot cheaper than an Apple Watch Ultra. But what are you missing out on? What does it do? How well does it run? Well, the answers to those are it's more a fitness tracker than it is a true smartwatch. It's got some interesting features, including cross-platform compatibility and decent battery life that make it a bit better. Let's get into full review. First of all, talking about the design, although obviously that is the most familiar part. The Watch Fit 4 Pro is built around a 1.82-inch AMOLED display with a peak claim brightness of 3000 nits, which means that it is indeed very bright, very good at working in direct sunlight. I've gone running with it and it's done me quite well with that nice visibility most of the time. At a resolution of 480 by 480, it's not the, most pixel-packed display you'll ever see, but Huawei's use of contrasting colors in the UI does mean that most things are really easy to see. Maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing for some tastes, but really easy to discern, which is basically what you want or need out of this kind of wearable. The Watch Fit 4 Pro sells in a green, blue, or black finish. Huawei supplied me with the green model just as a loaner, and that's the more interesting one because it's got a nylon strap on it, where the blue and black models have more rubberized style straps with them. Huawei in Australia is not selling alternative straps, although, not surprisingly, you can get an awful lot of third-party straps if you wanted a different kind of style to the watch. Your choice of colors doesn't just cover off what the color of the strap is going to be, however. The green model has a silver titanium band around it, where the blue model has a kind of blue-silver, and black predictably has black. That titanium ring runs around sapphire glass on the front, although the sides of the watch are just basic aluminium. The Huawei Watch Fit Pro is rated as being dive suitable, and with full disclosure in mind, I haven't gone diving with it. Although Huawei's claims here are a little bit odd, or at least the specifications that Huawei Australia is listing for this thing, because they say it's suitable for diving at up to 5 ATM, up to 40 meters as per their claims. As I say, I've not tested that. However, they also rate it as IP6X for dust and water ingress, and that basically means that it should be reasonably dustproof, but that they haven't actually water tested it under the IP standard. So I don't actually know what this thing's going to do if you go diving with it. Given they've claimed it's dive suitable under Australian consumer law, you'd absolutely 100% have a case if it did die fairly quickly. As a reminder, water resistance is not a permanent thing. I've got a whole video about water resistance and why most waterproof devices aren't. Go check that out at your leisure. But the basic thing here is, yes, this is a watch that should be able to survive going underwater, unless it isn't, because Huawei's specifications are so weird about this. I should also point out that the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro is the Watch Fit 4 Pro because there is a non-Pro model. It's slightly lighter, slightly less rugged, and has a few features missing from it that you find in the Pro. However, it is also substantially cheaper. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. In terms of setup, the Watch Fit 4 Pro runs on Huawei's own proprietary Harmony OS platform, and that has some benefits and some drawbacks. So the benefit here is that it's one of very few smartwatches you can buy that is cross-platform. So it will work on iOS, it will work on Android. Setting it up is an interesting process depending on which device you're setting it up with. So if you're setting it up with, for example, an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy phone, well, you'll find the Huawei Health app in the App Store and the Galaxy Store, respectively. If you're setting it up on any other Android phone, however, you'll actually have to sideload Huawei Health onto there. Google will not take the Huawei app, it seems, even though Samsung and Apple will. And look, sideloading is not a major drama, but there are some small security risks there. I can see some consumers being put off by that process. One nice thing I noticed setting up the Huawei Health app on a Google Pixel device was the app, it kept itself updated. You didn't actually have to install Huawei's app gallery in order for it to stay updated. It just recognized, hey, there's a new version of the app, and asked you if you wanted to update it. And it did that a couple of times during my review period. Huawei's Health app gives you a lot of data, although it doesn't always give you a lot of context around that data. You've kind of got to know what a lot of these scores mean in order for them to be meaningful. And sometimes the advice it gives can be a little confusing as well. So, for example, when checking out the details of a run, not a particularly fast run, but a run, I was presented with an on-screen query about how to get more data. And tapping on that told me that I needed to wear a Huawei wearable to get more data, such as heart rate and running form, which felt odd given I was wearing a Huawei wearable, and in fact at the top of that very page it told me what my heart rate was. I'm really not sure what's going on there. The Health app is certainly serviceable, I'll say that much. The Watch Fit 4 Pro tracks, or claims to track, a whole host of exercise types. All your standard stuff, running and that kind of stuff, absolutely covered. Indoor, outdoor, walking, all of that kind of stuff. That is the majority of the exercise I've done with this watch, to be clear. But also a lot of gym exercises and a lot of esoteric exercises. I mean, I can't say I know what the difference between, say, jazz dancing and plaza dancing is. In fact, don't even know what plaza dancing is. Please let me know in the comments below if you do. But apparently it can track the differences between those. Oddly, it also claims esports as a trackable thing. And I know the debate about whether or not esports are real sports is, perhaps a little contentious, but Huawei thinks they are, for what that's worth. For my own tracking purposes, I've mostly used it to track runs and walks with mixed success. The Watch Fit Pro tends to slightly overestimate my step count relative to other trackers. Now, that's not great, although it's not necessarily a huge problem because the really useful bit of that data is being able to track changes over time. And if it's always overcounting, then those changes will still become apparent in how you are exercising and how you're working out and how many steps you are taking. So you should still get a trend idea of how well or poorly you're doing. The Watch Fit 4 Pro has inbuilt GPS for tracking outdoor activities, although it's on the slower side to get its initial lock when starting exercises. And that's almost certainly a battery saving measure. Huawei builds in a feature where basically it'll get the lock on where you are, but there's a separate go button on the touchscreen to actually start the activity. So you can still do that, and obviously you can start exercises without the GPS in play if that's what you want. Outside of diving, which the Watch Fit 4 does not support, the other big feature that the Watch Fit 4 Pro has is golf courses. Lots and lots of golf courses, more than 15,000 according to Huawei. And I've got to say, I'm not a golfer. I'm really not a golfer. This would very much depress my late grandparents, many of whom were very, very keen golfers. Sorry about that, but I'm just not. But I could load up golf courses, I could look at them, I could see that they're there, and even some pretty esoteric ones here in Australia and some pretty small towns were present. So this could be a great feature if you're a golfer because the courses are all there. It says it will measure your swing, tell you how far you are from the hole, talk to you about weather conditions and stuff like that, all of which I'm sure are quite vital for golfers. I don't mean to rain on your parade. I'm just not one of you. Huawei also provides access to its app gallery platform via Huawei Health for apps that will work with the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro. And the issue here is, well, compared to, say, Wear OS devices, where you do get a huge variety of apps, many of which tie into your existing phone apps, the app gallery for Harmony OS, really doesn't have many apps at all. 25 of them, to be precise. From Camera Opus, which is your basic camera matching viewfinder kind of app, to Otter Life, which I think is a kind of gamified fitness platform, or maybe it's a health tracking app for otters. I'm not entirely sure. But the point here is more, there really aren't many of these apps here. This is more a smart fitness wearable than it is a true smartwatch. And that extends to some other features which either are not enabled in Australia or just not present. So there's no eSIM, for example. So if you wanted to use this as your sole device while out and about, you can't. And while NFC is technically present, the hardware is there, there's no tie-up with any locally available payment platform. So if you wanted to use the Fit 4 Pro as your payment device, again, the hardware is there, but you can't do that in Australia. I'm pretty sure you can do it in China if that matters to you. It's sort of the same story for the onboard ECG as well. This should be able to do ECG. The hardware is there. It does not yet have TGA certification here in Australia, so that doesn't work. Now, that's a very familiar story. We went through this with Apple Watches and Samsung Watches over the years, so that may just be a matter of time before it's actually certified. But if that's a feature you want or need right now, this is not going to be the device for you. What it does have in abundance are watch faces, both paid and free. Quite a lot of them, really nice range of styles. Honestly, I've not bought a watch face because, well, I didn't want to, but the free watch faces do give you a fair bit of variety across both analog and digital styles. It's all quite good stuff and a big differentiator, I would say, against something like the Apple Watch Ultra because, of course, that only comes with the watch faces that Apple wants you to have. What about battery life? Well, Huawei smart wearables have long had really good battery life, and they've had good battery life predominantly because they've been very aggressive about things like not having the screen on all the time, disabling GPS when not in use. They're pretty brutal about cutting down features to make the battery last longer. Now, it's only packing in a 400 milliamp hour battery, which is not tiny for a smartwatch, but obviously not huge in overall battery terms. And honestly, it did pretty well. Huawei's claim here is for up to 10 days of battery life, though obviously that depends on usage. In my own review period, I've typically managed about 6 to 7 days of usage if I didn't have the always on screen enabled. That drops to around 2 to 3 days if you do want to have the watch screen always there. The Watch Fit 4 Pro recharges wirelessly with a wireless charging cable included in the box, though you'll have to bring your own plug into play here to top it up. So should you buy the Watch Fit 4 Pro? Look, it's an interesting one. While stylistically it absolutely does resemble the Apple Watch Ultra, it's very much its own creature. And here I'm struck by the fact that the Huawei Watch Fit 4 offers most of the features of this phone at a much cheaper price. It's $299 here in Australia as opposed to $469 for the Ultra. And that makes me think that unless you really needed some of those advanced features, so the diving, the golf, the ECG, that might be a smarter buy. $299 does tick that price point down while still offering most of those features, that cross-device compatibility, which I think is actually a really good feature. And that's probably the one that I would opt for if I were you, but it's worth knowing, of course, the limitations, the lack of NFC, the lack of eSIM, for example. And obviously, if your budget can extend to a fancier smartwatch, then you can get an awful lot more apps as well.